Hey, what's up guys? Finally back with another movie collection vid where I talk about some of the DVDs and Blu-rays I own and give you my recommendations. I've got a wide variety of things to talk about today, so here we go. Now the first one I got here is a movie from South Korea. It's called JSA, or Joint Security Area. Now this might be as good a time as any to get into this movie because with everything going on in the news in North Korea lately, you probably understand the backstory as to how these are two nations that are divided, North and South. One of them is basically what you think of when you think futuristic democracy. On the other side, people are still living in the Stone Ages in a totalitarian dictatorship. But this movie dives a bit more into it. The plot is kind of told in a non-linear fashion. It's told bit by bit. Some pieces are near the end of the movie, and others are flashbacks showing what happened beforehand, giving backstory as to what happened later. The basic gist is that, on the North Korean side, 2 soldiers were killed and somehow a South Korean soldier's involved. Through the flashbacks, they explain that he was a guy who accidentally wandered onto the North Korean side, got stranded on top of a mine that was about to blow up, and the North Korean soldiers saved his life. Over time, they become friends. They start exchanging messages with each other and eventually start hanging out on the other side of the border. They show each other things that they don't have in the other's countries, like sweet desserts and pornography, and they really just become good friends. Unfortunately, what ruins friendship like politics? And that's basically what happens in this. Without giving too much away, it's kind of one of the saddest endings of any movie. And the sadder thing is that it was based on a real-life event. This is a movie that's almost 20 years old and it's still relevant. The countries are still divided, and the ending of this movie is still as relevant today as it was when it first came out. In that sense, it's a powerful piece of history, if you can even call it that, and it's definitely worth a recommend. Now, the Blu-ray itself is one that I ordered from South Korea, because the DVD is out of print and very expensive, so this is one that I had to order offline from a special website. I'll put the link below if you're interested. And the Blu-ray itself is in a terrific quality. The menus are bilingual, which is interesting. They have English and Korean, so you can navigate that easily. The movie itself is about 85% Korean, and it's got scenes that are in English. Unfortunately, where you're kind of out of luck is when it comes to the special features. So unless you speak Korean or know someone who does, you probably can't watch them. Anyways, this is a fantastic movie. Quentin Tarantino actually rated it one of the best since he's been directing, so if he's the guy who recommended it, you know what you're getting into. Now, the next one I got here is an independent release. It's the Star Wars Trilogy, the Unaltered Trilogy, the Despecialized editions. This is one that I bought from a convention from an indie seller. Now, if you're not too familiar with Star Wars, or at least the drama that's gone on into making them the last few years, it's that since they came out in theaters, they've had tons of edits and features added on, which were a cool bonus feature at first, but as time goes on, that's all you can get, and a lot of them look pretty terrible. Need I get into much detail on that? And if you're a fan of this series, you already know what I'm talking about. But that was the issue. They were kind of a cool bonus feature at first, but as time went on, it was all you could get. What makes this special is that it's a special fan edit, which there's a very cool video documenting the making of, how they took all different pieces of old videotape and film, whatever they could get their hands on, to restitch the original movies as they were shown in theaters. Now, if you're looking for this, you'll probably have to go shopping at a convention or online somewhere special. They're in their original versions, they look great, and something a little geeky, it's the first time that I've ever printed out a custom Blu-ray slip for myself. This is the original one that I bought it with. It kind of just screams bootleg on it. And here is the one that I had printed out from a special website. I just used the HD color printers at my college and printed that out myself. This is probably the most important bootleg you'll ever buy. Like I said, they all look great. The only unfortunate thing is there's no features. I remember going around the conventions and seeing a whole bunch of Star Wars documentaries that were taken from VHS and transferred to DVD. It was already probably a huge job to get this thing made, so unfortunately that's probably one thing we can't get, at least for a while, in one big package. Pick this up if and when you can. Next one I got here is from Arrow Video, and it's Basket Case. This is an independent horror movie from an independent distribution company. This was made back in the 80s when special effects were outstanding at best, and at their worst, maybe only subpar. I'd rather see a lousy puppet than lousy CGI any day of the week. These days, that's an unfortunate rarity. Cheesy 80s monster movie. The basic gist of it is there's this ordinary guy who goes to New York City, and strangely he's always carrying around a picnic basket, and he won't tell anyone why. At the same time, a bunch of various doctors are being murdered and disappearing all over, and somehow he is connected. I'll leave it at that. It's just a cheesy monster movie from the 80s, great fun to watch if you're with a group, but while we're at it, I want to give my respects to this company, Arrow Video. These guys are a great company. I love it when distributors pay attention to the little releases. If a big studio were to put this out, they would have been bare bones, it would have not had much on it, it might not have even been on Blu-ray. It's a great thing when a company pays this much attention to detail for such a small release. These guys gave it a very respectful release. They gave it a 4K presentation, a whole bunch of features, commentaries, interviews, and just look at this whole list. And one cool thing also is that it has an alternate slipcover. Here's what it looks like on the inside.
You can turn it on inside and then flip it around.
And there's what it looks like on the other side. See, it's the little things like that that I love, and it's also what I think is going to keep physical media like this alive, protected from Netflix, is that they put the extra effort in to make it worth it to the viewers. For what it's worth, I think it'll put a lot more on store shelves also. Now this next one I got here is also a lesser known one, and it's Bloodsucka Jones versus the Creeping Death. You can tell just by looking at this title, it's a crazy one. This was actually a gift from Eddie from a convention that he went to, and he actually got to meet the director and Bloodsucka Jones himself. In case you don't already know, he's that guy right there. Now this movie is kind of a mixed bag. It's got some scenes that are really funny, and other times where it literally just drags on. There's a couple of people who literally the entire movie do nothing but stand around, and there's really not a whole lot either in terms of special effects. There's zombie stuff, but it seems like it's more just trying to be funny and making jokes. But like I said before, it's kind of hit and miss in that the stuff that drags really drags, but the stuff that's funny is really funny. It's kind of like Bob's Burgers, like every fifth joke is funny. It was kind of a truly independent production. It looks like the guy had like $40,000 to work with in Southern California, which looking at some of the production value, you gotta respect what this guy was able to do with such a small amount of money. It's got a catchy theme tune, which I've actually made my ringtone on my phone. It's also a sequel, which I have not seen yet, but at least given my enjoyment of this one, I'd be interested in supporting this guy and seeing what he's all about in the future. It's kind of a group movie for me and my friends. In fact, my nickname for one of my friends in my phone is Bloodsucka Jones. It's cheesy, stupid fun, and you'll probably enjoy it too. Next one we got here is called Fire and Ice. This is an animated movie by a guy named Ralph Bakshi, who you might remember as the guy who made the animated Lord of the Rings movie. This was made in like the dark age of animation. Even Disney wasn't doing well at the time. So a couple of other animators like Don Bluth and Ralph Bakshi decided to take things into their own hands and really try and bring some new dimension to the genre. What I mean by that is, this is a lot more edgier. It's not R-rated, there's no cursing, but it is a lot more adult looking than most things you would see in animation. There is a lot of skin, and it is a lot more violent. You feel the hits these guys are taking partially because it's real. That's one thing that's fascinating about this animation, is that it's actually rotoscope, meaning that it was acted out first, shot on film, and the animators drew over their action, meaning that the characters and the way they move and look is more realistic. It is still kind of fantasy, fairy tale based. Imagine if Disney took it up a slight notch. Not too much, but just enough to keep you interested. It's no masterpiece, but it's still pretty cool to have, especially given that animation is going such a different route. 3D animation is taken over, and it seems like hand-drawn stuff doesn't exist anymore. There's a very cool making-of feature on here where they demonstrate how all that animation and drawing was done, and Ralph Bakshi's a guy I might be interested in looking a lot more into. He's a guy who feels that animation should be more for adults and not strictly for kids. Given this, it's interesting to see what kind of road that would take. Next one I got here is one you might be familiar with, Plan 9 from Outer Space. If you're not familiar with this one, let me give you a little bit of background as to the director. Directed by Ed Wood, who's been called one of the worst directors of all time. He made movies super fast and super cheap, which resulted in some of the so-called worst movies ever made. He would do one take of one scene and would say, "Cut, print, that was perfect." And he would almost never do a second take of anything. Here's another movie which talks all about that. This is probably the one that he is most famous for. I remember on Wikipedia 10 years ago looking up, like, what are the worst movies ever made, and this was highlighted. As time has gone on and I've watched it, a lot of people seem to agree that it's way too entertaining to be one of the worst movies ever made. Especially when you consider all the things that this guy did. He shot this whole thing in what was probably about 4 days on film in the 1950s when it was so difficult to do that. He didn't have digital cameras, he didn't have CGI. I'm having a hard time just recording this video in my own office, so I can't imagine what this guy had to deal with. As such, this guy should be applauded for at very least getting the movie made. Plus, in the stock footage, you get to see all the 50s cars rolling by. It's got memorable bloopers all over the place, quotable lines, And I personally think it does a decent job world building, especially when you compare it to a few other movies coming out that are trying to be big franchises of their own and fail. As for the Blu-ray itself, it doesn't really have all that much to offer. I guess they didn't really have making of features back in the 1950s. The movie was originally in black and white. As you can see there, it's labeled as in color, which you have the option to choose either one. That's basically the only feature, and when you put it on color, it looks very washed out. It has a couple other things like a commentary from Mystery Science Theater, Ed Wood Home Movies, and rare Ed Wood commercials. All things considered, if you would like watching old movies, or if you're with your grandparents, or maybe you're even just in a slow mood late at night, it's definitely worth a watch putting on. Now we're getting into more recent territory, with my most recent release, Bumblebee. This is the most recent in the Transformers series, and I would also say the best. I know nothing other than the movies. I never watched any of the cartoons growing up. I might have played with the toys, but I never knew anything else about them. When the first movie came out on DVD, a buddy of mine brought it over so we could watch it. I loved it. From there, I saw the next two in theaters with my brother, and for the most part, I really enjoyed them. The fourth I never saw in theaters. I wound up seeing that at a friend's house who had it on DVD, and I didn't really think much of it. By that point, I was starting to think the way I do now when it comes to movies. And the fifth one I had just never seen at all, because I heard it was so terrible, and I didn't want to give my money to any more mindless action movies. I think they learned their lesson because this one is anything but. It's a complete transformation, no pun intended. It's a lot more character-driven, there's a lot more emotion going on, and it's not just mindless action end to end. I remember in the older ones there would be so much blowing up and going on that you couldn't tell. For most of the movie, there's only about 3 Transformers that take up all the action. Bumblebee and 2 Decepticons. Plus this movie just has a lot more fun going on in it that doesn't rely on explosions or sex jokes or anything else that really just was Michael Bay. Plus, my current celebrity crush, Haley Steinfeld, is in it. It's a really refreshing take, and it gives me hope for the future that I hope more big blockbuster movies wind up going around. If a lot more movies came out like this, I might enjoy going out to the theater more often. Like with Basket Case, this one has a bit more to offer in terms of special features. It basically looks like any other Blu-ray you'd buy from a store. It's got a couple of extra decent features, deleted scenes, bonus content. Plus this Blu-ray comes with a little comic book that's a little bit of a precursor to the movie. All that considered, this is the most enjoyable Transformers movie, I think. I have to rewatch all of them, but I think this one will still be my favorite. Next one I got here is the first season of the Netflix's Daredevil. This is a show that took me a while to watch. I'm talking years ago now. I remember when it first came out, everybody was saying it was amazing. A buddy of mine said it is amazing. So I finally sat down and watched it. Now, the original Daredevil from 2003 with Ben Affleck is one that I was never really that critical of. It's another thing I have to give a rewatch, but in my memory, it's not so bad. But of course, it's nothing compared to this. This show is awesome in every sense with the development, and it's perfectly paced. Every episode it's a different subject. It builds itself up. It's just an awesome show. Now, unfortunately, this Blu-ray has no features on it. It's really just the episodes, which is no big deal. But it still would have been cool. I'm sure there's tons of making of features elsewhere, or set photos, whatever it be. It might also just be part of the way Netflix functions. That's another thing I gotta talk about. My thoughts on Netflix. You may be wondering, hey, this show is there. Why do you have it on Blu-ray? Well, because really I'm not a big fan of the way Netflix functions. I remember I had mine and I rarely touched it. I wound up just paying $10 a month for nothing. The price of it keeps going up, and the selection doesn't really change. Another factor of mine that I don't like is that I remember for a while on Facebook you would see things like, here's what's coming to Netflix next month, or here's what's leaving. I'm like, you know, it'd be great, why can't Netflix tell us that itself? I know it occasionally has things like, oh, this will be leaving notifications on the bottom, but I often just wound up putting things in like, okay, I'll watch this later, and by the time I get to it, it's gone. So I really just am not a fan of it. I think it's overall a better deal to just, buy this on Blu-ray. My math is that, you're paying $10 a month, maybe more, for Netflix? If you watch this thing once per month for 4 months, you've already gotten your money's worth. This is also one of those unfortunate cases that I've seen it in stores. I remember when it was brand new, I saw it in Target for like $30. I'm like, that's a little high for that. I'll wait for it to go down. That's one of the gambles with buying Blu-rays. You could see something for like full price when it comes out, buy it like that, and then a few months later it's in the $5 bin. You assume the same with something like this, that the price will go down, and then instead of going down, it's out of print, and the price either skyrockets or just isn't able to be found at all. Eventually, I just decided it was too much money to buy here in North America, and that's what this logo is for, so I bought it from Europe. Luckily, though, the discs are all region. So it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, you can watch this on your Blu-ray player. Next movie I got here is a very obscure one. You probably have never heard of it. It's called The Last Word, starring Wes Bentley and Winona Ryder. Very obscure, it's not very popular, and I've never seen it sold anywhere except for like the $3 bin at Big Lots. It's basically about Wes Bentley playing a poet and writer in Los Angeles, but he makes his living writing suicide notes for people. It's a very dark and grim thing that he's not even very proud of, but it's what pays the rent for him. While attending the funeral for somebody he wrote notes for, he meets the guy's sister. Over the course of the movie, they bond, they form a relationship, she opens up to him, but things start to get dramatic when she figures out more of who he is and what he does. But yeah, the movie does have a very dark premise and setup, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. It's got Ray Romano giving a dramatic performance, and the whole movie I think is just very well acted. It's no masterpiece, but I think it deserves more attention. Give it a watch and let me know what you think. Alright, we're in the home stretch, so next one I got is a little bit of a different case, but I just wanted to fit it somewhere, is an audiobook called The Disaster Artist. If you're wondering why I have it on a disc instead of just using Audible, same deal with Netflix. You think I get my drift. A lot of you may be familiar with the cult movie The Room. It's one of the best, worst movies ever made, and you probably know about it. If not, check it out. And if you have checked it out, one thing you may or may not be familiar with is that one of the actors from the movie wrote a book based on the experience, this one called The Disaster Artist, and this is the audiobook version. You can see they've got two different covers, one of which was made when the book was actually released, and this one closer to when the film adaptation came out. I guess with James Franco releasing a movie of it, we'll never see this cover ever again. Lately, I've been trying to get into the habit of reading more, and this was one of the first books I picked up. Whether you're just a casual reader or especially a film lover, you really should get into reading this. Each chapter details a different point in the guy's life. The book is told in semi-non-chronological order, how he came to be an actor and met the guy, and how he was kind of his inspiration to keep moving forward, and how he was such a strange guy to know and deal with all the time. The even-numbered chapters each document a different point in the making of The Room, from the most iconic moments to when it was finished up and when it was first released. Greg Sestero himself reads the audiobook. The basic reason to get this audiobook, other than if you're too impatient or antsy to sit down and actually read, is that this guy reads it for you, and he does this absolutely perfect Tommy Wiseau impression. It's the first time I've ever laughed reading a book. Definitely worthwhile if you're an avid reader or just a film lover or anything in between. Now, if you're wondering what I thought of the actual Disaster Artist movie, as is pictured here, let's just say that it's the first time I've ever been able to say for myself that a book was better than the movie. And last but not least, we got a big collection for you. The entire series of Danny Phantom on DVD. Now, when I was a kid, this was one of my favorite shows. It's about this kid who gets ghost powers and winds up fighting a whole bunch of others from an alternate dimension. It's awesome. It's over-the-top comic book style storylines from the guy who created The Fairly Odd Parents. Sadly, this is his best rated show, and it's also one that has been getting the least amount of attention. The guy's even made videos promoting special artwork, which he would love to do in a sequel series. But sadly, the finale of this is the last time we've ever seen anything for real. Alas, however, I gotta give credit to the distributors. This time it's a company called Shout Factory, if you can see that. There's no features on here, unfortunately, but you gotta give them credit for shoving 50 plus episodes of an entire show on here. It's a great package, and this is one of a handful of shows that I would love to see released on DVD. A lot of my favorite shows from when I was younger have yet to have much of a release at all. Drake and Josh, Jimmy Neutron. Hopefully these guys can jump on that like they did with this. But until that day comes, at the very least we can appreciate what we have. Well, that's everything I got for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think down below. If there's anything you think I should check out or what you think of the things I've shown. I'll be back with another video soon, so stay tuned.